in an isolated village in the Mississippi Delta, where even the wind seemed to walk slowly, lived Elias Moore, a black man, widowed and a former musician. He spoke little and smiled even less. Yellow fever had taken his wife and child, leaving only the echo of absence. Since then, Elias had repaired tools to make a living and avoided touching any memory. And in his soul, he carried a silence heavier than the nails he hammered. His house, made of weary wood, was surrounded by tall weeds and loneliness. He did not receive visitors, nor did he care to. He had a habit of conversing only with the fire. In the corner, a cloth covered what had once been a guitar, now buried in dust. And every night, before going to sleep, he looked at the sky, expecting nothing to happen, because nothing was all he had ever known. That night, the heat was thick, clinging to his skin like punishment. The darkness tasted like smoke, and the pitch black seemed to hold its breath. Elias swept the porch slowly, as if trying to fill the emptiness with routine. It was then that the sound emerged, a low crack, almost human, coming from the thicket. He stopped, listened again. It was not an animal. It was a lament. As he descended the steps, he saw a fallen silhouette near the crooked gate. A girl, lying on her side, dirty, wounded, her dress torn at the shoulder. Her breathing was shallow, as if each sigh cost a memory. Elias approached slowly, eyes fixed on her, his chest tight with foreboding. She lifted her eyes, and there was a silent plea. "Save me." He didn't ask her name or where she came from. That was detail. He lifted her into his arms as if he already knew her from another time. She was light, but carried an ancient weight, made of escape and hidden pain. Each step to the cabin seemed to reopen forgotten wounds in his heart. And in the silence of the journey, something in Elias began to move. He laid her on the blanket near the wood stove, lit the fire with charcoal. The flickering light drew scars on her face that the dark tried to conceal. He washed the girl's feet, cleaned the wound with warm water and dry roots. He made an improvised bandage with a torn piece of an old shirt, all with steady hands, trained not to heal, but to survive. She tried to speak. Her voice came out shaky, more breath than sound. Elias simply pressed his finger to his lips, signaling that words could wait. She obeyed. Her gaze, for the first time, seemed to rest. He gave her a spoonful of broth simmering slowly on the stove, and sat at a distance, watching the fire as one listens to old stories. The dawn stretched like a heavy blanket. Outside, the frogs began to sing again. Inside, only the crackling of the firewood. She slept with a calmer face, though still bruised. Elias observed every detail, the scraped fingers, the scratched knees, the breathing. It was like watching someone come back to life inch by inch. Elias didn't know if she was a runaway, someone's daughter, or just unlucky. But he wasn't interested. Her presence there was already enough for something to change. He felt a thread of warmth in his fingers, a memory of when he cared for someone. And for the first time in years, the silence of the house didn't feel hostile. It felt full. In the bedroom, he spread a blanket on the floor and lay down on his side, facing the wall. He didn't close his eyes right away. He heard her breathing, rhythmic, alive. He thought of his wife, of his son, and of a future he had buried without ceremony. He felt a knot in his throat, but he didn't cry. Not yet. He just whispered to himself, "God, let her stay." The sun rose slowly, peeking through the cracks in the boards. The girl opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the brightness of the world. Elias was already up, preparing cornmeal and washing his hands in silence. She watched him without speaking, as if trying to remember where she was. He looked at her kindly, but without intruding. He gave her space. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse from sleep and trauma. "In peace," Elias replied, and that was all. She accepted the answer as one accepts shelter in a storm. She took the hot broth and didn't say anything for a while. Sometimes words disrupt what the eyes have already said. The day passed quietly. Elias repaired an old hoe while sitting in the shade. The girl rested in a makeshift hammock made of clean cloths and a light blanket. The sound of the birds came back slowly, as if danger had passed. Elias wondered if she was running from someone, a husband, a father, a foreman, but he didn't ask. When she was ready, she would tell. Or not. The heat rose strongly in the afternoon. The roof creaked under the weight of the sun. Elias wet a cloth and placed it on her forehead. She smiled light, sincere, as if thanking something she had never had. That gesture disarmed something in him that he hadn't even known still existed. It wasn't passion. It was tenderness, something older and deeper. At dusk, she asked to sit up. He helped her carefully. They both stayed on the porch, side by side, without saying anything. The sky tinged with orange reflected in her eyes. Elias noticed that there was not only pain there was also strength. She was someone who had already taken a beating from life, but still breathed with dignity. "You didn't ask me who I am," she said. "You don't need to," Elias replied, without taking his eyes off the horizon. "I am," she began, but then gave up. He smiled gently. "Here, no one is obliged to remember what they want to forget," she nodded. That was all she needed to hear. Night fell with the sound of crickets and the smell of warm earth. Elias lit the lantern and placed it beside her mattress. She took his hand for a moment, not with desire, but with trust. And he didn't let go, neither fast nor slow. He just stayed. Outside, the moon seemed to watch over them with affection. For the first time in years, Elias slept with his soul at peace. No nightmares, no sharp memories. He woke once in the middle of the night just to check if she was breathing. She slept serenely, with her hand over her chest, protected by silence. Elias smiled without realizing it. He lay back down, in no hurry to forget. The dawn arrived gently, with the smell of firewood and thin coffee. Elias was in the kitchen, stirring the pot, when he heard light footsteps. The girl walked slowly, still weak but steady. She sat at the table without asking for permission. He placed a plate in front of her, as if it were already a habit. "There's something about you that doesn't match all the silence," she said. Elias looked at her, serious, then laughed a short laugh, like someone intentionally hitting a wrong note. "It's just that sometimes sound hurts more than silence." She understood. She didn't ask anything more. She just ate. But inside her and inside him, something had already awakened. The next day dawned stuffy. The sky was a heavy gray mass without wind. Elias felt a pressure in his chest that wasn't from the weather. The girl woke up stronger, with the marks on her body less vivid than those on her soul. They exchanged a few words, but the silence between them was different now. A silence that can be heard and chosen. While she washed her face with a jug of water, Elias chopped wood in the back. He wasn't thinking of anything, just listening to the sounds of the morning. Then came the footsteps, hooves, spurs. In the distance, the sound of heavy horses cut through the ground like a knife. And amid that sound, Elias felt something ancient, a threat. He stopped, stood up, eyes turned to the dry dirt road. First, he saw the dust, then the figures 8 men on horseback. The animals neighed as if they also didn't want to be there. They came armed, hats low, with the posture of world owners. And ahead, an old man, white, his face hard like cracked soil. Elias stepped forward to the threshold of the house. The girl appeared at the door, paralyzed. The old man got off the horse as if he were stepping to dominate. He looked directly at Elias, then at her. He spat on the ground, as if that were enough to mark territory. I came to claim what is mine. The girl took a step back, but didn't flee. Elias remained motionless. The old man pointed at her with his chin. "You're hurt. Did he touch you?" The men behind him held rifles like canes, ready to intimidate. "I know his kind. Do you think just because he is free now he can take whatever he wants?" Elias didn't answer, but the air around him felt heavy. The girl took a deep breath, her voice firm despite her dry throat. "I came of my own free will. He saved me." The father narrowed his eyes, red with anger. "Saved? He poisoned you. You never saved me from anything. You just locked me up. You just commanded." The old man turned, his face away. One of the henchmen approached the porch. "I want her back now. I won't repeat myself," the old man shouted. Elias took a step forward, positioning himself between the door and the men. He said nothing. He didn't need to. His presence spoke. The henchman laughed. "This guy thinks he owns her now." The tension was a copper wire stretched between 2 thunderclaps. "This is going to end badly, black man," the old man said, venom in his voice. The girl stepped forward, standing beside Elias. "If you want to take me, you'll have to tie me up in front of them." The men hesitated. The girl's courage was unexpected gunpowder. The old man didn't expect confrontation. He expected obedience. One of the men rested his hand on his shotgun. Elias simply looked. It was a gaze that didn't threaten, he judged. He made the man weigh his own choice, like lead in his chest. "I don't want blood here. I just want justice," the father said. But no one believed he knew that word. The girl crossed her arms, her dress still torn, her skin still wounded. But it was she who seemed invincible at that moment. "Justice? You kept me locked up like your property. You were my responsibility. I was your ghost, your shame, your slave." Silence, the kind that breaks the ground. One of the men coughed, uncomfortable. Another pulled his hat further down, trying to hide his eyes. Elias still hadn't said anything, but he was present in every breath. And that, in itself, already bothered the oppressors. "Listen here," said the father. "This land is still ours. These people still owe us respect." Elias crossed his arms. The girl turned her face in disgust. "You should have died with that time," she said. The old man raised his hand, perhaps to strike, perhaps to order something. Elias stepped forward. That was enough for the arm to stop in midair. One henchman mumbled something to the other, eyes on the ground. They didn't expect a moral confrontation. They expected fear. But what they found was firmness and a woman who didn't want to be. Saved, just free. The old man walked in tight circles like a trapped bull. "What do you want? Money? An agreement? A piece of land?" Elias finally spoke. His voice was deep, but not loud. "I want you to go back where you came from." "That's it." The old man laughed. It was an ugly laugh, with no real teeth. Do you think this is a choice? Do you think you have power? Elias looked into his eyes, and for the first time, the old man looked away. The girl took Elias's hand, not as a plea, but as confirmation. The henchmen saw that, and something wavered in them. It was no longer about race, nor pride. It was about being on the wrong side of history. The ground felt warmer, the air thicker. Something was about to happen, even without moving a muscle. The old man tried one last bluff. I can call more. Men, bring reinforcements. You can, said Elias. And when I come back, there will be war. There will. But today, you only brought shame. The phrase fell like a knife. One of the men turned his horse. The old man was still talking, but the others no longer listened. Murmurs grew among the men. Doubts. Fear. The girl stood firm, as if she had been born for that moment. And then, in the distance, a different sound began to fill the air. A sound that none of them could understand at first. Elias noticed before the others. A light vibration, almost imperceptible. It wasn't a drum. It wasn't wind. It was something deeper. The old man stopped, looked around as if he felt he had lost control. What noise is that? He asked suspiciously, but no one answered. Because the sound was still an omen, the horses began to stir. The leaves seemed to move without wind. The silence that had once threatened now seemed to embarrass. The old man widened, his eyes as if he saw ghosts. Elias knew. They were coming, but he didn't say a word. He just stood where he was, firm as an ancient trunk. The girl looked at the road, her eyes lit by something he couldn't see. They are coming, she said, with a calm that disarmed any weapon. The old man didn't understand, but he understood enough to be afraid. Elias took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, smiled. Because what was coming now? No one there was prepared to hear. The old man was still trying to understand what he felt. Was it fear, shame, or just too much heat? The sound came from far away, but it felt like it was growing from within the earth. It was neither the sound of hoofbeats, nor the rustling of leaves, nor the clinking of weapons. It was a wordless call, as if the delta itself were waking up. And then, from around the bend in the road, they began to appear, one by one, walking. In silence came the familiar faces from the village. People Elias hardly ever saw, but always knew were there. Men with calloused hands, women with steady gazes, old folks with bent spines, formerly enslaved, children of pain, grandchildren of the lash, all standing, now whole. Without haste, without shouting, without weapons, but with something in their eyes that hurt, the old man took a step back. The thugs exchanged glances, unsure of what to do. What the hell is this? One of them murmured, as if feeling the ground. Shift. Elias remained motionless, next to the girl, watching the procession of the forgotten. The crowd grew, coming from alleys, paths, fields, from behind the trees. They did not march, they flowed, like a river that decided no longer to. Except banks. In the front there came a woman with a white scarf, her feet cracked from labor. Beside her, an old man with a staff carved with African symbols. Behind them, barefoot children, teenagers with fiery eyes and silent mouths. No one spoke a word, but the whole world heard what they were saying. Because what they carried was not revolt, it was living memory. The old man tried to shout, "This is an invasion. It's a threat." But his own voice seemed to disobey. It came out thin, without firmness. The men around lowered their weapons with their eyes, even without releasing their hands. Elias took a deep breath. He felt something rise in his chest. It was as if time had stopped to demand respect. Then someone began to sing. There was no melody. It was just a note, Ra, deep from within. A sound that mixed hunger, longing, death, faith, and contained fury. Another joined in, then another. Soon, 100 voices. They did not shout. They bled sound. The blues that was born there did not come from strings or sheet music. It came from the throats of those who had never been heard. It was ancestral lament, but also a warning. Hear no more. The old man instinctively covered his ears, but that was not sound, it was truth. And truth cannot be silenced. The horses grew restless. One of the thugs stepped back 2 paces, unwillingly. Another dropped his rifle to the ground, as if it were burning. The music grew louder, not in volume, but in density. The air thickened, as if invisible words weighed there. And then the old man knew he had lost. It was not a defeat of field, nor of discourse, nor of right. It was a defeat of presence. He no longer belonged there. The blues that spread was stronger than his failed authority. There was no shot that could surpass that. There was no master. Where the song of the earth cried freedom. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, and in that brief gesture, he cried, not with tears, but with acceptance. The music washed away what pain had never been able to erase. The girl held his hand and squeezed it firmly. She too understood. Salvation never comes from above. It comes from within. The crowd formed a semicircle around the house. It was protection. It was judgment. It was resurrection. The old man looked back and saw that no one was following him anymore. The men were there, but they were no longer with him. Because the blues had done what no bullet could do, disarm from within. Let's go, one of the thugs said, his voice trembling. The old man stared at him, but saw he no longer had authority. Another was already mounted, eyes down, head bowed. The music still echoed, now with organic tribal harmony. And with each note, a scar was exposed and healed. The old man tried to say something, but there was no one left to listen. He climbed onto the horse slowly, without glory, without noise. He left as he entered, carrying only his own shame. The soundtrack of his defeat was made by those he had tried to erase, but their memory sang louder than any order. A small boy tugged at the hem of the elder's dress and asked, "What is this they are singing?" She smiled, without showing her teeth. "It's what comes before freedom." And the boy fell silent, listening more than he understood. The girl cried silently, still standing. It was not a cry of fear, nor of pain. It was liberation. She looked at Elias, and he at her. Without a word, they knew something had been sealed there. Not between them, but within each one. Those who came stayed for a while, still singing softly. Some prayed. Others danced slowly, feet on the beaten earth. It was a ceremony without altar, without priest, without liturgy. It was just life trying to take root after death. And it was beautiful, painfully beautiful. One of the elders approached Elias and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Today, you are not alone anymore." And he left without waiting for a response, as one who blesses. The music began to dissolve into the air, like smoke after a fire. But the echo would remain, inside, forever. The sky opened. A gentle breeze swept across the field and touched the sweaty skin of everyone there. It was as if the world itself were saying, "Now, yes." Elias looked at the girl. She was no longer afraid. Neither was he. The last chords died in the collective throat of the community. But even without sound, something still vibrated. It was what remains after the blues: presence, body, root. The old man was already the past. There, another time was born. The circle held for one more moment, as if the entire universe held its breath before delivering the ending. And then the elder raised her hand and pointed at Elias and the girl. "You too. Stay there." Because what would come now was bigger than any word. The circle remained. The silence was now different, reverent, suspended. It was not absence of sound, but presence of meaning. Everyone looked at Elias and the girl. There was no protocol, but there was something older than any law: collective recognition. There, before the community, a new kind of love was born. The elder approached slowly, as if stepping on sacred ground. She took the scarf from her head and handed it to the girl with both hands. She received it without understanding, but felt the gesture as a blessing. The white scarf fluttered between her fingers, light as forgiveness. And the old woman's eyes said, "Now you belong." An old man approached Elias. He brought a staff carved in spirals. He placed it between the two and gave a slight nod. It was the gesture of someone recognizing a commitment without altar, without paper. The earth, the feet, the eyes, everything was witness. Elias took the girl's hand. She did not hesitate. A murmur ran through the circle. It wasn't speech, it was feeling. The people knew what was happening. They didn't need to name it. Some smiled, others were moved in silence. From the back of the circle, someone began to sing softly. This time, it was celebration. The young woman, still holding the handkerchief, tied it around Elias's left arm. He did the same, tying the other side around her wrist. A symbolic knot. A bond between wounds, not between promises. The audience closed their eyes. It was simple, it was real, it was eternal. Their two survivors became home to each other. The elder said, "No one here needs to say yes out loud. But if you feel that it is, stay where you are." Elias and the young woman did not move. They didn't even blink. The silence lasted longer than necessary, like all sacred silence. And then someone started to clap, one, then another. It wasn't applause. It was rhythm. A beat of earth, of body, of soul. Soon, voices joined in. Low, smiling, gentle. They sang without words, just sounds, like mothers rocking the future. Children danced around, running between the adults. The field turned into a ceremony. Elias smiled. A real smile that cracked the stone he had been carrying. He was the same man, but now he was whole. The young woman leaned her forehead against his, eyes closed. They didn't say, "I love you," but every part of their bodies said it. Life, after so much silence, finally sang. Their feet touched the ground lightly, as if dancing without music. But there was sound inside. It was the sound of what survived, of what chose to stay, of what resisted the whip, the abandonment, the shame. It was the sound of now. One of the women brought cornbread and left it at the couple's feet. Another brought wildflowers and threw them over them. It wasn't luxury. It was offering. It was ritual without a Bible, but with truth. The circle remained closed, forming a wall of affection. No one entered. No one left. It was sacred. The old man with the staff said, "This is your new name, Elias and Alma, because now you are one body." She smiled in surprise. Elma. Never had a name like that. Elias nodded. Yes, it made sense. She was that breath. And he was the space where the breath echoes. The clapping faded. The singing dissolved. But the final silence wasn't an end. It was consecration. The ceremony had no end. Because what is true doesn't finish. They just stayed there, in the center of what remained. The love didn't start there, but it was recognized. The community began to disperse slowly. Each person took a piece of that scene within themselves. Like a seed, like a good scar. Elias and Alma stood, still holding hands. The ground felt firmer beneath their feet. A boy tugged at Alma's dress. Was it a wedding? He asked, innocent and direct. She laughed tenderly, kneeling to look him in the eye. It was what needed to be, she replied, simple as the sun. The boy smiled, accepted, and ran off. On the porch of the house, there were now 2 cups, 2 chairs, 2 silences. But that silence was different, lighter, more shared. Elias looked at the dirt road, now clean. The past had left mounted on its own fear. The future walked barefoot. With them. Alma prepared cornmeal with pieces of kale. Elias brought water from the well and lit the fire. Everything felt old, but everything was new. They weren't starting a life. They were continuing what survived. And that was more powerful than any promise. At night, they sat together under the porch. The crickets sang. The sky at last seemed at peace. Elias spoke little. Elma even less. But their eyes met at the right moments, like an invisible score. There was no rush. There was no wait. There was presence. The full moon illuminated the yard like a silent blessing. Elma rested her head on his shoulder without asking. He placed his hand over hers without thinking. It wasn't about possession. It was about pact. It wasn't about salvation. It was about choice. The world was still the same, hard, unequal, threatening. But there, in that crooked house, something had changed. 2 bodies once fragmented now composed something whole. The blues weren't sung that night, but it was there in every gesture. And when the last cricket fell silent, Elias whispered, "You brought me back." She simply smiled, because sometimes smiling is more than enough. In that land marked by mourning, a new song was born in silence. And this time, it wasn't to remember the pain. It was to plant the future.